Welcome back. Just 23 minutes to go for markets to close, and the selling pressure, by the way, is back in the last half an hour of trade. Nifty is down almost 65 points in trade. It slipped below that mark of 11,200, once again inching very closer to its 100-day moving average of 11,130. Bank Nifty is down 200 points in trade. Whole host of stocks falling. When you look at the Nifty constituents, we've been highlighting stocks like Tata Motors, Yes Bank, Z, which are currently the top losers, but also stocks which have succumbed to selling pressure are the likes of JSW Steel, GAIL. You've also got IndusInd Bank, that's down, by the way, 3% in trade, and Sun Pharma once again has come under some bit of selling pressure. Well, the broader markets are also feeling the pain. Both the mid-cap as well as the small-cap indices right now are down between 0.5% to 1%, and the market breadth, by the way, has deteriorated. So actually the mid-cap index is at day's low right now. Pull up the contributors list. It's going to give you a clear picture as to which are the stocks which have dragged the index lower in the last half an hour of trade. So you've got something like HDFC, IndusInd, of course, these stocks are trading, and some bit of support coming in from stocks like ITC, Bajaj Finance and Kotak Mahindra Bank. If you look at the broader markets, there are some stocks, however, which are outperforming. So you've got TTK Healthcare. It's been trading in the positive territory for majority of the day today. So that's seen gains of about closer to 11%. But the picture is not looking that great, because in the last half an hour, we've once again come under some bit of selling pressure, and the India VIX continues to rise. It's seen gains of almost 5 to 6% in trade right now. But besides 7%, actually, it's inching very closer to that mark of 29. Which are the other stocks which feature on Sharad Dubey's Fab 4 stocks of the day? Let's go across to him and find out. Hi, Sharad. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Avni. The first stock is Endurance Tech. The stock is up almost more than 2% after it gave a good set of quarterly numbers. You know, the revenues went up by almost 10%, and the EBITDA margins went up at almost 26%. And also the company declared a dividend of around 5 odd rupees. And the up next stock we are having is Time Technoplast, which is up by 5.3%, as about 2 million shares have exchanged their hands in 2 block deals. So details of these deals we'll get to know in the post-market hours. Up next we are having is Bajaj Finance, which is up by almost 4%. This is ahead of the quarterly results, as the street expects strong operational performance going into this fourth quarter. And the last stock for the day is SRF, which is up by almost 6.5%, hitting its lifetime high, and also trading at almost 10 times its 20-day average. And apart from this, there's also a high open interest of around 64% for this stock. So these are the Fab 4 stocks for the day. Back to you.
Thanks for that, Sharad. So watch out for some of those stocks. Actually, SRF is the one that I want to take it to our technical experts. We've talked about the losers quite a bit. Let's talk about some stocks which are doing well too. And Ruchit, if I could come to you on SRF at 2763, for somebody who's gone long already, is there merit to stay long while the market is looking like shaking up a bit?
Actually, Nilesh, if we see last couple of trading sessions, yesterday during the at least opening half an hour or 1 hour, the stock prices had seen a dip towards 2360. But since then, it was a complete V-shaped recovery. And again, we have seen the up move in the second half yesterday and in today's trading session has been supported by very high volumes. So I think if someone is already long in this stock, the best strategy could be to hold on with a trailing stop loss method. And right now, the support is placed around 2660, 2670. So below 2660, one can place a stop loss on existing long positions. And as the stock prices move higher, one should move the stop loss also at higher levels, so that the trailing stop loss method works quite well.
Manav, the other one, we've spoken, I believe, about Tata Motors briefly, but now that the stock is trading at the lowest point of the day, actually you can pick and choose out of the top 2 or 3 Nifty 50 losers. Which is the one that looks the weakest? Is it Tata Motors? Is it Z, which is very volatile, or is it something else?
See, at the current levels, I think HUL is something which is giving a fresh breakdown at the current levels along with Tata Motors. In fact, Tata Motors have already seen a series of decline, but the risk-reward ratio for fresh shorts for Tata Motors is not favorable. If you look at the chart of HUL, it's, after a good sideways consolidation, it is seeing a breakdown. And this consolidation was actually happening below its 200-day moving average. And we have also seen an increase in volume in last 30 minutes for the HUL on the basis of fresh breakdown, and this is a proper STBT kind of a scenario. So in this case, I see a strong resistance for the stock close to the levels of 1700 on the upside, but eventually the stock is quite well poised to break its recent lows and eventually test the levels of 1630 could be the next immediate target for the stock on the low side on the immediate basis.
Okay, that's HUL. That's sitting at days low with cuts of 2%. Let's quickly address how the MRPL quarter was. If you look at the revenues, that declined nearly 15% in the quarter gone by, and lower operational expenses aided to profitability this time around, and the refining margins still seem to be under pressure. But what's the reason for that? Let's put this question across to the Managing Director of the company, Mr. M. Venkatesh, who joins us on the phone line. Hi, Mr. Venkatesh. Good afternoon to you, and thanks a lot for joining us. We've seen your numbers. The revenues are down 15%, and the EBITDA was somewhere about 816 versus the EBITDA loss figure, operating loss, which was seen in the corresponding quarter. But the main question I think the street would be wanting to know, what marred your GRMs this time around, and also if you could just give us a guidance as to what sort of GRM numbers can one look at for FY20.
Good afternoon, madam. As rightly pointed out, there were a lot of stress in the refining margins last fiscal, especially Q3 and Q4. While the last 2 months of Q4 was better, going forward the margins are holding, especially the gasoline margins are holding, and jet kero margins are better. So I would expect $1 or $2 to add on to the current margins what we have achieved for FY 18-19.
So you're saying you're expecting a figure of 5 to 6 for FY20 for gross refining margins?
I'm hopeful. We are all hopeful that going forward it should work out. But having said that, the Gulf situation is developing, so we are watching the situation.
The company was forced to shut down one of its refineries because of fresh water shortage, which was there from one of the rivers. Tell us what's the status of that and how has that impacted your numbers?
The impact, in my view, is quite marginal. We have planned our annual maintenance shutdown of one of the refinery complex to match the summer months. The mandated shutdown we have taken, and we are addressing the water crisis now. We are hopeful that we continue to operate for the next 15-20 days. The river should start flowing with the monsoon setting in. So, impact of water crisis, in my view, should not be much.
Okay, before we let you go, sir, just a word on any update with regard to merger with HPCL, any communication that you've received?
As I've been constantly saying, the two owners, ONGC and HPC, I believe are in touch with each other with respect to HPC MRPL merger. It's left to them, and things going forward, something should be happening.
Okay, Mr. Venkatesh, we leave it at that note. Thanks a lot for joining us and taking us through your quarter gone by, and all the best to you for FY20. Well, that's the management of MRPL giving you guidance for gross refining margins for FY20 to be somewhere in that range of 5 to 6. Let's see how that pans out. But for the time being, the stock's just about flattish or down 0.3%. Let's bring in our next guest on board. We're joined by Mr. T.S. Harihar of HRBV Client Solutions, who's right here with us in the studios. Hi, Mr. Harihar. Good afternoon to you. Well, when one thought there was some bit of recovery which kicked in yesterday, at higher levels there is fresh supply which is coming back. Would you attribute this sell-off to it's more global in nature, or markets are turning jittery ahead of the results?
I think it seems to be a mix of many factors. Firstly, see, there is not much of a clarity on the trade war still. It's more like I will talk, I will not talk. I don't think there is too much of clarity on that front. So people are still a little worried about what's going to happen there. Secondly, I think elections, of course, yes, that's a big, I would say, overhang as far as the Indian markets are concerned. Thirdly, I think there are suddenly a lot of companies that are looking very, very vulnerable. So if you look at the big losers today, you have the likes of Z, you have the likes of Yes Bank, you have the likes of IndusInd Bank. All these companies, I think, for a long time, they had enjoyed great valuations, superb growth. Suddenly, all these companies are being questioned in terms of non-performing assets, in terms of, corporate governance standards, etc. So if you look at the losers, most of them are companies where there has been a big vulnerability in the last few months. So that, I think, is probably, in my view, also playing a very, very big role in the market. I would believe that yesterday was probably an exception rather than the rule. So we should probably get back to a kind of I would say an extremely shaky market. And that's visible in the VIX. VIX at 29 is not something we have sustained for such a long time. So that's very clear that there's a lot of panic in the market.
Okay, let me start off with the losers of Nifty. What do you do if you have stocks like Tata Motors, Yes Bank, or for that matter, Z in your portfolio? What should be the approach now?
See, Yes Bank, Z, IndusInd Bank, I've been saying for quite some time that you've got to get out of these stocks, or should have got out of the stock long back. It's probably too late now. Tata Motors, I still believe that it's a great long-term story. I know it has been a big underperformer in the last 1 year, so it's very difficult for someone to really go in and buy that stock. But I would believe that there's still a long-term story. There is a shift to electric cars. There is a gradual shift out of diesel. So I think there are a lot of things that are working positively for Tata Motors. And if you have a 1-2 year perspective, I would believe that this auto cycle should probably turn around in the next 3 or 4 months. So that is not a very long-term problem. But Z and Yes Bank, I think there are very, very serious issues on the asset quality front.
Hari, when we'd spoken last week about Jet Airways, you had said, why is this stock even a 3-digit stock? I mean, it's still a 3-digit stock, but it's soon moving towards double digits. But what's your sense now? I mean, it's a complete move out of the stock? Take yours, even if you're making big losses, take those losses, move out?
I think logically, yes, because you buy a stock when there is a company. When there is no company, what do you buy? The whole problem in Z is, in Jet Airways, there is nothing left. The aircrafts have been repossessed by the lessors. Most of the parking lots and the flying rights have been sold out. The senior management of Jet Airways is gone. So what is left? So even assuming that technically tomorrow you get a fresh buyer, capital gets infused, what are you going to do with all that? You will probably require 2 to 3 years to actually start functioning. So it's a very, very difficult situation there. And I think it's probably, I would say a matter of formality before the company actually kind of shuts its doors.
Okay. Stay on, Hari. So much more to speak about. Keep in mind, it's not just Z, which is, of course, been very, very volatile, but the kind of pressures that we see in a bunch of other names are very interesting too. As we said, yes, Tata Motors selling off big time. We've seen what's happened to Tata Steel over the last 3 or 4 sessions and been substantial cuts and lots more. So after 1 day of a pullback, we're back to weakness for the markets at large. Let's try and find out what dealing rooms are making of this. Yatin Mota and Darshan Mehta here with their channel checks. Good afternoon, both of you. Yatin, let's start off with you first.
Neeraj, a couple of stocks, given the fact that last half an hour we have seen strong selling coming in. Clearly, few stocks which are not giving gains is Bajaj Finance. They report their quarterly earnings tomorrow, and ahead of that, 4.5% higher for that one. Dealers, are recommending a buy today, sell tomorrow strategy as far as this stock is concerned. As far as Ujjivan and UPL are concerned, these are again the 2 stocks wherein dealers, are positive on. In fact, Ujjivan is one stock wherein dealers are indicating that domestic funds are buyers in trade. 3.5% up for that one, hasn't corrected much despite the fall in the markets. And UPL also is one more stock wherein dealers are indicating buy based on technical trends. But Darshan has a few more.
Yeah, so Jubilant Foodwork, that probably is the stock that you watch out for. It's up 3.5% after the numbers that came out. A couple of reasons dealers believe that the momentum will continue is because the numbers were not bad. They came in line with estimate, and probably the SSSG number comes on a very high base. So dealers believe that despite a high base, the number was decent. They expect short covering to come in, because if you see over the past few days, there has been significant amount of selling that's happened on the counter. Indiabulls Housing Finance was another counter which actually has come off the day's high, but did manage to rally all the way to levels of almost 728, 730. One of the large domestic funds was the buyer in Indiabulls Housing today. And as Yatin pointed out, Bajaj Finance is one of the counters which is up almost 4%. Remember, the results are there tomorrow. Dealers anticipate a strong show from Bajaj Finance.
All right, Darshan, thanks very much for that. That is a quick dealing room wrap out this afternoon. Yes Bank is now down 8%, so looking extremely jittery at this point. 143, that's the lowest point of the day. 91.34 million shares have been traded, so it's really not looking good for this particular counter. Following that is Tata Motors, still holding on to losses of 8%. Z has had a slight bit of a flip-flop, a slightly more volatile trading session. You've got it moving down about 8-9%, then coming up was down 3% when we started the show. Now is back down to 6.5%. I've spoken about all of these stocks in big detail. Hari, just a quick word on these housing finance companies and how you'd position for them.
See, I think we'll have to be a little more selective in the housing finance space, because you have the choice of the likes of probably Divan housing on one end, where there's a huge problem of maturity and mismatch. Your short-term markets are very tight, cost of funds have gone up, and these stocks are facing downgrade almost on a daily basis. So I think those stocks, in my view, typically you've got to stay out of. But if you look at the results that have come out, I think some of them, like HDFC results, are very impressive. LIC housing has also been pretty good. So, I think these kind of stocks is where you should park your money. So if you're looking at HFC, it cannot be the, I would say, second and third rung of HFCs, but probably the top level, like the HDFCs, the GIC housing finance, the LIC housing finance. I think that is where your entire focus should be made on.
All right. Time for some closing strategies as well from our technical experts. Ruchit, let's start off with your closing ideas.
Mothers and Sumi can be shorted for STBT kind of thing, because we have seen that the underperformance that the stock has shown since last few weeks has been continued. Also, the harmonic pattern PRZ is placed somewhere around 113, 112 kind of range. So I think this 113, 112 could be tested in tomorrow's trading session. So one can go short with stop loss about 119.5 for target around 113.
Manav, what about you?
In the current markets, I would like to go with a buy. Simple reason that the markets are in deep oversold levels, and there is a high likely chance we could see a good rebound rally as the markets are at important support. Keeping that in mind, UPL would be a buy as the stock has witnessed a good breakout on the daily charts. The momentum overall looks quite positive, and the breakout today has accompanied by above average volume. So going forward, we expect this momentum to continue, and if the market manage to hold on, this stock could see a good rally on the upside. A stop loss of 950 for UPL for an upside target of 990.
Okay, pull up Aditya Birla Fashion. The numbers came a while back, and actually the profits, the top line was up nearly 9 to 10%. Profit figure was at 202 versus 113. Look at that, how the stock's fallen about 9% in trade. And the other one, which came out with the numbers, Lupin, the numbers looked better. In fact, it was, I think, the high tax rate of 50%, which dented the bottom line. But still, they have posted a profit if you compare it to the last quarter as well. Hari, any thoughts on these two numbers which have just come by? Because there is some selling pressure seen in both.
I think AB Fashion seems to be more of a consumer kind of jitters that we are seeing right now. And again, today's market may not be the right market to really evaluate a stock, because almost, I think, all and sundry are down. So, see, Lupin, I have a larger problem. But I have a problem with most of the pharma companies. The way you have these, the latest US lawsuit that has come out, all these names have been part of the list. And it's a very serious issue. Let's not forget that when the 2016 election was fought, Hillary Clinton actually fought on the premise that she would drive all these pharma companies out. So I think if something like that is going to happen by the next election, so we could have a tough time for these pharma companies. So we are very, very skeptical of pharma companies, especially the likes of Lupin, Taro, the subsidiary of Sun, where there are serious problems of overpricing and inflation. So to me, I think any pharma stock, including Lupin, is strictly a no at this point of time.
Hello, guys. Aditya Birla Fashion, and I think there's some exceptional item as a result of which the profit looks propped up. 9.5% gone on 3 million shares. This stock usually doesn't trade such quantum of shares as well. So clearly disappointing numbers, and that's why the stock is correcting. Amara Raja, meanwhile, on your screens at 119 versus 109. That's about a 9% growth in the bottom line alone. Just that much, 9%. And that stock too has come off. I must say this earnings season isn't quite shaping up to be really good. We can argue that some of the results are coming out better than estimated, but the actual reportage of the numbers, the reported profit growth, or the reported revenue growth in lots of cases is not turning out to be a great one. 2 or 3 names which are coming off, Manav, Chopra, Aditya Birla Fashion, Amara Raja, how do these look on the charts?
See, if you talk about Aditya Birla Fashion, yes, the stock has seen a series of decline, and most importantly, today being the result day, it has also breached important weekly support. So one should let the stock cool off for a bit in case if it still manages to crawl back towards the 195 level, and maybe tomorrow it sustain above that, then it could be in a broader range. But if I talk on a medium term perspective, it is going to be a little negative. We could see this decline, see some few more legs on the downside. I sense 170 to 175 could be the support zone for the stock going forward. Amara Raja Batteries has overall been quite a weak stock since past few months. It did manage to hold on to its support of 650, 680 for quite some time, but since it has violated that support, we have seen the stock see a fresh series of lows, and it has been an underperformer. Though the stock is in deep oversold levels, I don't recommend one to do any bottom fishing into Amara Raja, but in that case, any pullback rally towards the levels of 635 to 640 should be used as an opportunity to exit or initiate fresh short positions.
Just a cliff drop for these names. AB, Aditya Birla Fashion, B. Ramaraja Batteries is just a straight drop for these counters post the numbers. Just a few minutes away from market closing, and it's turned for the worse for the markets, for the indices as well, now trading heavily in the red by about more than 0.5%. Hari, if you were to leave us with an idea today, what would it be?
No, again, my favorite shorts remain, Jet Airways, Z, IndusInd, Yes Bank. I think they are my favorite shorts. Long, honestly, I don't think I would be keen to buy anything at this point of time.
All right. So, Hari, we'll leave you on that note. Thanks so very much for joining us. And so Hari is not convinced of going long at this point, rather go short. Take your bets where the trend is headed so that you don't burn your fingers too badly. But that's what you've got, 0.5% plus decline on the indices, Neeraj.
Yes, indeed. By the way, I just want to mark Reliance Industries. If you can just, before we start wrapping up the market, show the full the graph of Reliance Industries. I think that one too has just come off in the last few minutes of trade. So along with the markets, this too, the big boy is correcting as well. But we'll talk about that in just a bit. The market's ending, it's a disappointing close. Remember, the start was much positive. So the intraday movement has rather been subdued or on the downside. And I would reckon that the same should be showing at the broader end of the spectrum. It's showing in select stocks for sure, but it's definitely showing on the headline numbers as well. The small cap index down about 1.3%. The market, but that should be poor. We'll talk about that. First, the large cap names and what's moved and what's not on the gaining side. Bajaj Finance ahead of the numbers up 4%. Aisha second on a trot doing okay. UPL very close to life highs and very close to that 50,000 crores of market cap. Some gains for Kotak Bank, some gains for ITC, but those are few and far in between. Now turn focus to the losers. Yes Bank, 8.5%. Clearly the market taking note of this development that happened overnight yesterday. Tata Motors 7.5% down. Z has had a very choppy day, but ending the day 7% lower. So clearly some concerns out here. JSW Steel from amongst the metal names correcting. IndusInd Bank has looked wobbly the last few days, and certainly today is no exception. And then Bharti Infra down there about 2.5% lower as well. So lots of stocks falling, but the headline makers are the top three, which is Yes Bank, Tata Motors and Z Entertainment. Mind you, the market breadth, as I said, is also looking very, very wobbly. But Navneet, what about the mid caps and the small caps?
Well, it's selling pressure seen across the board and even for the broader markets. But let me just start off with a few gainers first. Something like TTK Healthcare, that counter was up. There was some buying interest seen for this one. It's closing off the day's high with gains of nearly 7%. And the other one was Dishman Carbogen. We don't talk about this stock on a normal day, but the volumes on the cash side was pretty much high. And as you can see, the buying came in the last hour of trade, closing around the levels of 216. And SRF, this is the counter we've been talking about. Post the numbers, it was up 5% yesterday. And today also it's closing around the day's high mark. And the stock also touched its life highs. In fact, if you look at the build-up for SRF futures, was quite significant. Traders betting on the long side. Jeevan was also witnessing some bit of buying interest in today's trade. So 3.5% higher for this one. In fact, this was one of the technical picks also won by one of our guests. Federal Mogul Goetz, this is the other counter which was up and about today, up almost 6%. Not that liquid counter, but closing the day around the levels of 526. On the losing side, well, whole host of stocks. Idea reacting today once again on the downside, closing with cuts of about 8%. One of the top F&O losers. BHEL, the stock was up in yesterday's trade around 6%, and it gave up yesterday's gains, closing the day around the levels of 61. Lupin came up with the numbers. Operationally, the numbers looked good. The margins were at somewhere about 19%, but the street was not too enthused with the quarterly performance, down almost 4%. Vakrangi saw immense selling pressure today. That count is closing with cuts of about 16 to 17%. TVZ saw selling pressure, and once again coming under pressure was Dish TV alongside Z Entertainment. So Dish down almost 8 to 9%. There was some shorting seen for this one on the future side. Union Bank, it reacted to its earnings. The provisions were higher, which dented the bottom line, so 7% lower for this. Aditya Birla Fashion came out with the numbers. The profits were at 201, but out of which 190 was the tax credit, because of which the bottom line looked bumped up, but the top line was also only up about 10%. And when the numbers came, you saw that selling pressure counted closing with cuts of 10%. And Dipan Housing with multiple downgrades coming in for its debt instruments, and this one too succumbed to selling pressure once again today, closing with cuts of almost 9%. Devina.
All right, so a rude shock for all the bulls out there after seeing a decent start and a relatively decent first half. The second half turns out to be a damn squib. Taking a look at the final closing figures, I think we're still short a few seconds, or we've got the final close here. About 0.5% down for the indices. The banks losing a little bit more, about 0.7%. A quick look at the broader market picture, it's worse off. So the mid-cap index and the small-cap index, like Namit highlighted, has lost more ground. Nifty small cap index is down 1.2%, while the mid cap index loses about closer to 0.7%. The contributors, obviously, Navneet, will have to be the heavyweights: Reliance, HDFC, IndusInd Bank, all of them losing some steam. Tata Motors, a big knock of 7.5%. Yes Bank down 8%. So all of that weighing down heavy on the index.
Well, the countdown continues now as we inch closer to May 23rd, and VIX has once again started to move higher. So India Volatility Index closing around the levels of 28.6, higher by almost 5.5%. Let's also see how the participation panned out in today's trade, considering there was a sell-off which was seen in the second half of the session. So yes, the F&O turnover was above the average, what we usually see, 12.5 lakh crore. On the NSE cash side, I think it's the figure of 30-31, which we usually see on daily basis, but slightly higher, I would call it, what we usually see on a normal day.
This is actually a number that we 17 odd lakhs is what we see on every Thursday, closer to 17, 18 lakhs.
Yeah,
so
tomorrow being the expiry, so there'll be more positions being built up on the options side.
This is a big number one day prior to expiry, for the weekly expiry at least. Let's take a look at the market breadth for once that turned negative towards the end of the trade. So that's what you've got. So a big a gaping yawn towards the end of trade after seeing a relatively decent start to the morning session. 541 stocks advanced versus 1,000 stocks that have declined. So the close, a disappointing one nonetheless. So we carry on with those losses after that one-day blip that we saw yesterday. Closing comments, Ruchit, from you as we step into trade tomorrow?
Yeah, so 11,300 call option, which we spoke about at the start of the show, that that is the highest open interest for tomorrow's expiry. And what we see in last half, what we saw in last half an hour, we were unable to take out the 11,300, and markets corrected from those levels. Now, if you look at some of the positional charts, then on the lower side, the 61.8% retracement of the previous up move that we have seen in the month of February and March is placed around 11,060, 11,070, and also the 200-day moving average is coming around 11,040 kind of level. So I think we would test this level in tomorrow's trading session, which is about 60-70 point towards lower from what we have seen in the closing. But this is the level where if any existing short positions are there in the system, then they should be squared off, and one can even look to do some sort of bottom fishing when the market approaches this 11,050 to 11,080 range.
All right, what about you, Manav? What are your closing comments as we step into trade tomorrow?
See, we have already seen a decline, and the support of 11,100 is the important support for the markets going forward, and I sense this could provide some sort of a cushion on the immediate basis. Yes, 11,300 is the resistance, which would definitely provide momentum once if it is breached. But when we are looking at the overall formation, even though if we break 11,100, I don't see there could be much of a follow-down move. The markets are due for a pullback rally, and maybe at the current levels there are not good risk-reward ratio for fresh shorts, but I think this could be a good time where one can look for some selective buying. There could, most of the stocks on the weekly charts are near the important support zone, and let me name stocks like Mahindra & Mahindra, or the Maruti, or Hero Motor, or Lupin. These are the stocks from the Nifty basket, and which are near the important support zone. So if there is any pullback rally from these stocks and from the frontline banks, there could be a good chance of a good move coming forward for the market. So one needs to take some sort of a contrarian bet at the current levels, and keep a watch on 11,100 support zone.
All right, we leave it at that, gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining in. Ruchit as well as Manav, appreciate your comments on the show. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Countdown from Navneet, myself, Neeraj, and the entire team who's put this show together. Thanks so very much for watching.